Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. For today's lecture, we'll be providing another installation into our Anti-Federalist Papers series going on number 47. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 46, I would highly encourage you to do so because understanding the Anti-Federalist Papers in addition to the Federalist Papers will give you a very well-rounded, very advantageous understanding of the U.S. Constitution, and understanding the U.S. Constitution will be absolutely necessary if you intend to combat any sort of lawfare waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Anti-Federalist Papers. Like I said, we're going on to number 47. Now, before we get into it, there are multiple places from which you can get a paper and digital copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers. Go ahead and get both, just in case for whatever infinite number of reasons you can't access one or the other. You can still read through this information. While you're out there looking, if you haven't done so already, get a copy of the Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. Excellent. So number 47 is titled Balance of Departments Not Achieved Under the New Constitution. This essay is made up of excerpts from Sentinel's letters of October 5th and 24th, 1787, taken from the Independent Gazetteer. He says this: I am fearful that the principles of government inculcated in Mr. John Adams' treatise, Defense of the Constitutions of Government of the United States of America, and enforced in the numerous essays and paragraphs in the newspapers, have misled some well-designing members of a late convention. But it will appear in the sequel that the construction of the proposed plan of government is infinitely more extravagant. I have been anxiously expecting that some enlightened patriot would, ere this, have taken up the pen to expose the futility and counteract the baneful tendency of such principles. Mr. Adams' sine qua non of a good government is three balancing powers, whose repelling qualities are to produce an equilibrium of interest and thereby promote the happiness of the whole community. He asserts that the administrators of every government will ever be actuated by views of private interest and ambition to the prejudice of the public good, that therefore the only effectual method to secure the rights of the people and promote their welfare is to create an opposition of interests between the members of two distinct bodies in the exercise of the powers of government and balanced by those of a third. This hypothesis supposes human wisdom competent to the task of instituting three co-equal orders in government and a corresponding weight in the community to enable them respectively to exercise their several parts, and whose views and interests should be so distinct as to prevent a coalition of any two of them for the destruction of the third. Mr. Adams, although he has traced the constitution of every form of government that ever existed, as far as history affords materials, has not been able to adduce a single instance of such a government. He indeed says that the British Constitution is such in theory, but this is rather a confirmation that his principles are chimerical and not to be reduced to practice. If such an organization of power were practicable, how long would it continue? Not a day, for there is so great a disparity in the talents, wisdom, and industry of mankind that the scale would presently preponderate to one or the other body, and with every accession of power, the means of further increase would be greatly extended. And that is deadly true. Now, it's a little exaggeration to say it as one day, but within the decade, you have Washington directly contradicting the very chant that he was shouting during the American Revolution. Not even a decade after the U.S. Constitution is implemented, does Washington take up the sword and hold at gunpoint 500 Pennsylvanians, at gunpoint of 10,000 soldiers, 500 Pennsylvanians who refused to pay an unrepresentative, abusive, unconstitutional tax. It's known as the Whiskey Rebellion. The state of society in England is much more favorable to such a scheme of government than that of America. There, they have a powerful hereditary nobility and real distinctions of rank and interests, but even there, for want of that perfect equality of power and distinction of interests in the three orders of government, they exist but in name. The only operative and efficient check upon the conduct of administration is the sense of the people at large. Suppose a government could be formed and supported on such principles. Would it answer the great purposes of civil society? If the administrators of every government are actuated by views of private interest and ambition, how is the welfare and happiness of the community to be the result of such jarring adverse interests? Therefore, as different orders in government will not produce the good of the whole, we must recur to other principles. I believe it will be found that the form of government which holds those entrusted with power and the greatest responsibility to their constituents the best calculated for free men. A republican or free government can only exist where the body of the people are virtuous and where property is pretty equally divided. In such a government, the people are the sovereign and their sense or opinion is the criterion of every public measure. Go ahead and highlight both of those sentences. Virtuous and where the property is equally divided. Not distributed, divided. Very important distinction. For when this ceases to be the case, the nature of the government is changed, and an aristocracy, monarchy, or despotism will rise on its ruin. The highest responsibility is to be attained in a simple structure of government, for the great body of the people never steadily attend to the operations of government, and for want of due information are liable to be imposed on. If you complicate the plan by various orders, the people will be perplexed and divided in their sentiment about the source of abuses or misconduct. Some will impute it to the Senate, others to the House of Representatives, and so on, that the interposition of the people may be rendered imperfect or perhaps wholly abortive. But if, imitating the Constitution of Pennsylvania, you vest all the legislative power in one body of men, separating the executive and judicial, elected for a short period, and necessarily excluded by rotation from permanency and guarded from precipitancy and surprise by delays imposed on its proceedings, you will create the most perfect responsibility. For then, whenever the people feel a grievance, they cannot mistake the authors and will apply the remedy with certainty and effect, discarding them at the next election. This tie of responsibility will obviate all the dangers apprehended from a single legislature and will the best secure the rights of the people. It's a fair point. Is it historically repetitive? In some instances, yes. In some instances, no. I would say in about 30% of historical instances in which a Republican form or a derivative of Republican form of government was instituted, is that true? Do the citizens actually remember who conducted the misconduct, who brought about or who caused the grievances to occur, and did they remove the person? I would say about 30% of the Republican or Republican-esque governments formed in history actually upheld that principle, but he makes a fair point. Remember, only the educated are free. If you expect to be ignorant and free, you expect what never was and never will be. Thomas Jefferson, and then Epictetus was that first quote. Having premised this much, I shall now proceed to the examination of the proposed plan of government, and I trust shall make it appear to the meanest capacity that it has none of the essential requisites of a free government, that it is neither founded on those balancing restraining powers recommended by Mr. Adams and attempted in the British Constitution, or possessed of that responsibility to its constituents, which, in my opinion, is the only effectual security for the liberties and happiness of the people. But on the contrary, that it is a most daring attempt to establish a despotic aristocracy among freemen that the world has ever witnessed. Thus, we see the House of Representatives are on the part of the people to balance the Senate, who I suppose will be composed of the better sort, the well-born, etc. The number of the representatives, being only one for every 30,000 inhabitants, appears to be too few, either to communicate the requisite information of the wants, local circumstances, and sentiments of so extensive an empire, or to prevent corruption and undue influence in the exercise of such great powers. The term for which they are to be chosen too long to preserve a due dependence on accountability to their constituents, and the mode and places of their election not sufficiently ascertained, for as Congress have the control over both, they may govern the choice, by ordering the representatives of a whole state to be elected in one place, and that two may be the most inconvenient. The Senate, the great efficient body in this plan of government, is constituted on the most unequal principles. The smallest state in the Union has equal weight with the great states of Virginia, Massachusetts, or Pennsylvania. The Senate, besides its legislative functions, has a very considerable share in the executive. None of the principal appointments to office can be made without its advice and consent. The terrain and mode of its appointment will lead to permanency. I think that's supposed to say term. I'm not sure. I haven't heard of the word terrain, but I could be incorrect. Will lead to permanency. The numbers are chosen for 6 years, the mode is under the control of Congress, and as there is no exclusion by rotation, they may be continued for life, which, from their extensive means of influence, would follow, of course. What do we hear stated pretty often? Term limits. What is this gentleman right here talking about? potential permanency because of their extensive means of influence. The president, who would be a mere pageant of state unless he coincides with the views of the Senate, would either become the bead of the aristocratic junto that in that body or its minion. Besides, their influence being the most predominant could the best secure his re-election to office. And from his power of granting pardons, he might screen from punishment the most treasonable attempts on the liberties of the people when instigated by the Senate. Mr. James Wilson asserts that never was charge made with less reason than that which predicts the institution of a baneful aristocracy in the federal Senate. In my first number, I stated that this body would be a very unequal representation of the several states, that the members being appointed for the long term of 6 years, and there being no exclusion by rotation, they might be continued for life, which would follow, of course, from their extensive means of influence, and that possessing a considerable share in the executive as well as the legislative, it would become a permanent aristocracy and swallow up the other orders in the government. That these fears are not imaginary, a knowledge of the history of other nations where the powers of government have been injudiciously placed will fully demonstrate. Mr. Wilson says, quote, "The Senate branches into 2 chambers, the one legislative and the other executive. In its legislative character, it can effect no purpose without the cooperation of the House of Representatives, and in its executive character, it can accomplish no object without the concurrence of the President. Thus fettered, I do not know any act which the Senate can of itself perform, and such dependence necessarily precludes every idea of influence and superiority. This, I confess, is very specious, but experience demonstrates that checks in government, unless accompanied with adequate power and independently placed, prove merely nominal, and will be inoperative. Is it probable that the President of the United States, limited as he is in power and dependent on the will of the Senate in appointments to office, will either have the firmness or inclination to exercise his prerogative of a conditional control upon the proceedings of that body, however injurious they may be to the public welfare? It will be his interest to coincide with the views of the Senate and thus become the head of the aristocratic junto. The King of England is a constituent part in the legislature, but although an hereditary monarch in possession of the whole executive power, including the unrestrained appointment to offices and an immense revenue, enjoys but in name the prerogative of a negative upon the Parliament. Even the King of England, circumstanced as he is, has not dared to exercise it for near a century past. The check of the House of Representatives upon the Senate will likewise be rendered nugatory for want of due weight in the Democratic branch, and from their constitution they may become so independent of the people as to be indifferent of its interests. Nay, as Congress would have the control over the mode and place of their election by ordering the representatives of a whole state to be elected at one place, and that too the most inconvenient, the ruling powers may govern the choice, and thus the House of Representatives may be composed of the creatures of the Senate. Still, the semblance of checks may remain, but without operation. This mixture of the legislative and executive, moreover, highly tends to corruption. The chief improvement in government in modern times has been the complete separation of the great distinctions of power, placing the legislative in different hands from those which hold the executive, and again severing the judicial part from the ordinary administrative. Quote, "When the legislative and executive powers," says Montesquieu, we will definitely be going over his works in the future. Let me restart that quote. "When the legislative and executive powers, says Montesquieu, are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty." Signed, Sentinel. Ooh, got a little ahead of myself. Excellent. So if you have any questions about what was said in number 47, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding papers, or there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture is going to be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. Regardless of the topic of the next lecture, until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.